Final picture. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. This is a general meeting of the Southwest Hills Neighborhood Association. My name is Chris Jockek. I'm the chair. We have a board, and I wanted they all help put this all together. So I do want to introduce them. Rita is here. John and Deb are here. Beverly and Clay. Clay is in the back taking notes. He's our scribe. So there we go. And we have Ralph. The unfortunate part about tonight is that we're too big to fit in the house where we normally are. But it's not May yet, so this structure is not officially open, which means the bathrooms are not open. But we do have someone monitoring the house, and there is a restroom in the house if you need to before you go. Okay, we have a great panel here tonight to help us understand the woes of the budget for the city. We all know that there is we're missing some money, or not missing some money. It's not like it disappeared on us, but we're at a deficit. It's not unlike a lot of communities. But tonight's group that we put together is going to help us understand why we're in the position, what has been talked about in order to figure out a solution, and that's where the fire fee came from. We will get the answer as to why it's a fire fee and what that means. Our speakers are all well versed in this, and I'll introduce them in a couple of minutes. I do want to mention a couple of other activities that we will be somewhat hosting partially coming up in May. We have May 10th, we have a recycling event for all those items that are not typically recyclable in the blue bins, or the blue bins, yes, the recycling bins. And so that is May 10th, and that'll be here. And then on May 18th, during Historic Preservation Month, the historical board of the house, the Wayne Morris, the whole property, the farmhouse, hosts an open house, and that's May 18th. And they have carriage rides, they have food, you can take tours, and you'll get information about the history behind the home and Wayne Morris. So put that on your calendar, keep that on your calendar. There'll be some other nonprofit tables here for information from the parks and the Raptor Center, the wildfire group, and fire group. It could be our last hurrah, because we don't know what's going to happen with their city funding. I hope you all will pay attention to this. The fact that you're here tonight indicates to me that you do care. But the city council is going to need your input, to make the best decision. Like I said, we're not alone, and this dilemma that we're facing, and it's going to be very difficult for the city council to make a decision on it. Part of that discussion is the referendum. However, tonight's meeting, what I'm hoping you walk away from here is to understand why. Not get into a debate of who or such and the clash of the referendum versus other groups, but you understand why we're in this position. We have the experts here. Matt Keating, second district. Ward
2, South Ward.
Wisconsin, we call it districts. Well, that's where I came from 5 years ago. So pardon me for getting verbiage mixed up. But he represents 90% of SHiNA's boundaries. Brittney Quick-Warner is CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. She's going to be able to provide a perspective from the private sector and how they are working with the city to work through this whole discussing the way that there's conversation going on there. So she's going to be able to help us out understand from that sector. Hi, Pruce-Zimmerman. He is the chair of the budget committee. The budget committee is the first part, if I say that right, of the whole budget process. They advise the council. Will be able to really, and they'll correct me, I'm sure. If I'm misrepresenting what they do, but and then we have Eliza Kashinsky, and she is the first ward council person. She has also served on the budget committee as well as the revenue committee, which my understanding is they are the first ones. They looked at all the options as far as how do we get to a more balanced budget. Is that fair?
Oh,
Okay. All right. She'll help us out there. We put together the stars. These are the people that know what is going on. Each of them is going to speak for 8-10 minutes, whatever they need, without going long, because we want to hear from you. This is a conversation. We're hoping, so I'll shut up. Did I miss anything? Word?
There is a sign-in sheet going around.
Oh, there you go, yes. Because we don't know what's gonna happen come June 1st. We don't know how we're going to be, we're gonna still exist for the SHiNA. But we don't know how necessarily we are going to be able to let people know that we exist. Because we don't know what's gonna happen with the city and their responsibilities and our relationship with them. So that all has to be figured out. So there are 2 clipboards going around. Please make sure you put your name and email or phone number or however you want us to contact clearly, so we can still be able to contact you. We do want to be able to continue to bother you because we still want to see you. Okay, any?
So that's in lieu of the paper.
Pardon?
That's in lieu of getting the paper for the notice.
Yeah, that postcard we sent out was $1,500.
Yeah, I'm just figuring.
And we aren't gonna have that money, so, you know, unless we find a sugar daddy somewhere. And I'm not looking for one, you know? And so that is how we're going to be able to contact you. You all have obviously, that you're here, want to be involved, or at least other time, so we appreciate that. All right, okay, I'm gonna shut up. I think I've said enough. Matt, you wanna start?
Sure. Can you all hear me or should I use the microphone?
Would you use the microphone, please?
Okay, we are on Zoom, sure, so we may have people chiming in. So, okay,
Is this better? Great.
and I'll be timing because I want to watch the time here.
Chris, thank you for organizing this. SHiNA board members and SHiNA neighbors, thank you for being here tonight. What a beautiful evening in Eugene. To my panelists, Councilor Kashinsky, Pruce-Zimmerman, Brittney Quick-Warner, thank you for your service to our community, and I look forward to a spirited conversation. I'm Matt Keating. I'm your city councilor for South Eugene. It has been a 2025 for my family and yours too. On January 21, the day after the inauguration, we lost my mom. Stage 4 cancer. 4 weeks to the day, we lost our Great Dane. It was 3 weeks shy of turning 14. She was the oldest Great Dane, was the oldest living Great Dane in the country. And with the recklessness that's happening back east, that's coming home to roost and affecting our local communities, the pausing of grants, the freezing of funds, the economic uncertainty, the disruption and deportation fears that run through our community.
Okay.
We've lost my mom, we've lost my dog, and I'll be damned if we lose our democracy. What I don't want to see is our local community brought down to the studs the same way Elon Musk and Donald Trump want to do to these United States. So it begs the question, how do we get there? Because I trust that my friends my colleagues on the panel would agree that we agree on far more than we disagree. But there are vital services in this community that fundamentally need to be saved. I see Carrie is here from Green Hill Humane Society. The proudest moment in my tenure as your city councilor is finding the dollars to help save Green Hill Humane Society's funding. And I do not want Green Hill to go the way of the dodo. And I suspect there's no one here at tonight's proceedings who wants to see Green Hill go the way of the dodo. Fire services. There's a fire station that's under threat of closure. Parks, public safety, park ambassadors, community resource officers, not to mention cahoots. And I'm sure you're all aware that our beloved mental health, behavioral health stabilization crisis mobile unit, excuse me, I'm getting the two confused, crisis helping others on the streets, because there is a crisis mobile unit propped up by the county that is birthed from Senate Bill 947 in 2019, which the Oregon legislature mandated every one of the 36 counties in Oregon shall have a behavioral health, mental health crisis service unit. So there are several now here in Lane County, Florence, Elk River, Oak Ridge, Cottage Grove, and even Eugene, Springfield benefit from these mobile crisis units. However, there's a service gap. Whereas cahoots would take persons in crisis, either de-escalate, deal with substance abuse or substance use issues. They would work with teens, they would transport, they would do wellness checks. That's not necessarily happening under the current county model. I hope they'll get there, but at least the mobile crisis units propped up by state law and operating under the direction of the continuum of care, which is Lane County, they're able to reach more persons countywide, but not necessarily deliver the services that cahoots did. Cahoots, folks, or a new version thereof, would be part of our proposed budget that ultimately would go the way of the dodo if we don't fill the hole. Now, what's in front of us, and you're going to hear my colleagues talk about this, are several options. I don't believe in the binary that we just have choice A or choice B. I think there are multiple off-ramps, and there is a opportune moment for our new mayor, Mayor Knudsen, a friend of all of ours here at the table, to partner with stakeholders, and that includes the chamber, to find a new direction. Now, I don't know what that new direction looks like. Yes, I was one of the 5 counselors that I think made the best decision that was in front of us at the time to advance a fire service stabilization fee, because I can't stomach the idea of an $11.5 million hole in this community that would include animal services, fire services, parks, public safety. I think there are ways. And my pledge to you tonight is I'm here to listen and learn and hear from you about the creative ways, not just the beloved services that our municipality provides, but I want to hear creative ideas about how do we, if we go to the ballot, it's gonna, I suspect everyone here would agree, it's gonna be a knock them out, drag them out, costly endeavor. Arguably one that no one wins. So my pledge to you as your city councilor is I'm open. I want to hear from friends and stakeholders. I want to hear from constituents and colleagues, from SHiNA neighborhood leaders. What path do you see that's the best path forward that saves the most services, raises the most revenue, and doesn't divide our community? With that, I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Brittney Quick-Warner, CEO of Eugene's Chamber of Commerce.
Thanks all for giving me a moment. So I'm just gonna kind of walk you through the timeline of how this conversation came to be. Fast forwarded a little bit to the last couple years. So City of Eugene has a budget committee made up of 8 citizen appointees, and then the 8 councilors, city councilors and the mayor serve on that as well. The city manager is technically responsible for developing the budget for the city. The council passes that budget, but it's the role of the city manager. So she will, with support of her staff, bring budgets to these budget committee members and council members every year during the budget process. And they also have forecasting. So they usually do 6-year forecasts. A few years ago, our city shifted from an annual budgeting process to a biennial budgeting process. Try to save some resources, make some things more efficient. And in that process, and through those conversations, there was also an emphasis on priority-based budgeting. So in the past, the way our budgets work is you have a budget for 1 year, you set it up for the next year with exactly the same level of services, and then adjust for the cost increases and things like that. And that's where the budget committee is kind of starting. So they wanted to shift to this priority-based budgeting process, which we understand is still underway. And the forecasting that's done indicated that we are going to have a deficit handful of years down the road. So they've known this for a little while. This last budgeting cycle, the decision was made to sort of make a plug with the expectation that they would have a conversation about how to plug those revenues. So it was about 8.3 million, I think, ultimately that the budget committee said, we'll pass the biennial budget with the expectation that we're going to come back and fill that. So they then directed the city manager to establish a revenue committee to come back and look at how can we increase revenues to fill this budget gap. So that committee was convened. They met in late 22 into early 23, or 23 to 24. The years are flying by. And that revenue committee was made up of kind of citizens outside of the budget committee, some overlapping. And they were tasked specifically with looking at revenue. So initially going into that conversation, there were some folks who expressed some concerns about, well, let's look at both sides of the profit and loss statement, right? Especially if you're, someone who regularly manages a budget, whether it's a personal family budget or a business budget. That's typically how you approach it. Is you look at both sides. What expenses do I have? What income do I have coming in? And at some point you have to reconcile those two things, right? Well, the process that the city initiated was only looking at revenue. So when those folks asked that question, they were told this is not really the charge of this group. We're only looking at revenue. So it kind of started out in a place where folks felt like we weren't really getting the whole picture. And even if you are only looking at finding new revenue, it's kind of nice to know where are your current expenses. Do you understand where are things costing you the most? Are there revenue producing activities that we could be doing to enhance? So I just think that there was a fuller conversation that some folks were interested in having while they were trying to solve this problem. So in that process, there were a couple things that came out of it. That revenue committee ultimately looked at a lot of different options, and there was a handful that rose to the top, and ultimately the city staff put forward this fire services fee. They also changed the ordinance last year to the stormwater fee in order to allow those dollars to pay for parks in a way that wasn't done before. So it was an ordinance that council passed last summer, which allowed the city to raise that stormwater fee to then fill about $700,000, I think, of a gap from the stormwater services piece. So there was a couple of budget revenue strategies that came out of it. The fire services fee, the conversation really started with council end of last spring into the summer. And I was just rewatching some of those council meetings today. Even in those meetings, it was made clear by councilors that if this is a decision we're going to make and an opportunity we're going to pursue, as councilors, they had a responsibility to help the public understand that and to educate folks. What is this new revenue source? How is it going to work, et cetera? We were engaged in conversations with the city as they came out with this proposal. We stayed connected to all of those meetings, so we understood that it was coming out. And we had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns right off the bat. We were very open with communicating those in the moments that we had. I had a lot of conversations with the city manager about the concerns that we heard from businesses throughout this whole process. So from the beginning, when this was initiated, I will say from the chamber's perspective, we've been paying attention and have been weighing in as we've been able. The official public hearing for this was in November, early October, early November. which we testified in opposition to this fee for a few reasons. One, we didn't feel like it was very transparent. We think just general community members having to pay a new fee that's called a fire services fee, which we know of the $10 million that's charging $8 million of that is essentially shifting funding from fire out of the general fund and allowing that to backfill other services. Only $2 million of it is in new service funding. So that is just, it's just a really confusing thing for the general public to understand without a whole lot of public education about why and how, et cetera. So we just didn't feel like it was a very transparent way to actually name this fee. Really, the problem is the city has a budget gap, right? They need stabilization, and that is what this is helping to do. We also didn't appreciate the fact that it could increase at any amount with the vote of the city council. And it was permanent. There was no sunset. So even when you look at the budget projections of the next 6 years and going into the future, we're not always going to be in the same situation we are today. And there wasn't a mechanism built in to actually reevaluate, do we still need this fee? Has our budget balanced out? We know there's some things coming down the pipe that will adjust our budget one way or the other. But that wasn't a part of this conversation. It was a permanent fee that could be increased in any amount with just a vote of the city council that was never going to go to the public for a vote. Those things gave us the most heartburn out of this thing. So we expressed those concerns early on. We had conversations with the city, made suggestions of just call it something else, or let's put a cap on it, or let's send it to the voters in a few years. Like we were all along trying to propose some options that we felt like could make it more palatable. And we were also all along saying we really need a priority-based budgeting conversation with our city, because the reality is we're living outside of our means at the moment. And all of us as individuals living in the community have also absorbed a lot of cost increases. And so we are all experiencing that too. So to say that the city is experiencing inflation and increased costs, and so we need to increase our taxes, doesn't really account for the fact that we're all also feeling that, right? So this is just adding on. So there was a lot of urging to the city to look at that priority-based budgeting process and to look at what could the alternative be? What if we did look at those cuts? Unfortunately, that conversation in our minds happened very quickly and without a lot of deliberation and conversation from council. It was presented to them on February 10th, what a menu of possible cuts could look like. And they voted that night in order, or to put the fire service fee on, or to move forward with the fire service fee. So there wasn't a discussion, there wasn't opportunity for the public to weigh in and say, wait a minute, what about these services instead of those? And let's move these around. And what if we adjust it this way? None of those conversations happened because that option was presented to them in the same meeting that they ultimately voted. We at that point urged them to just put it to the voters. If this is important and we need this fire service fee, send it to the voters and then go out on a public education campaign from the council's perspective, because that could have happened in May. And they could have had that resolved in the May ballot if that, so that was what we urged ultimately. If we didn't, we were trying to change things along the way. Last chance we had, we said, send it to the voters in May. Council decided not to do that. They moved forward without it, which is their prerogative. And we also said in that letter, we believe that this is going to get referred to the ballot if council doesn't make that decision themselves. And so once council did vote that, our organization, with a whole lot of input from our members and folks in the community, said, okay, we're going to exercise our right as a organization, as community members, to refer this to the ballot. So that referendum activity took place. It ended up qualifying for the ballot. Now we find ourselves in a situation where council gets to make decisions about how that changes going forward. So they can do nothing and let it go to the ballot in November. They could opt to send it to a special election in August. They could also repeal the ordinance and move forward in a couple different directions. They could repeal the ordinance and make the cuts. They could repeal the ordinance and come up with an alternative solution. We are urging them to repeal the ordinance and to look at both cuts and potentially alternative solutions. So our organization is and has been very open to conversations about what this looks like in a different matter. We didn't wake up January 1 and say, we want to refer some to the ballot and run a huge contentious campaign in the community. We have a lot of other things that we're focused on and wanting to do. And so we agree with what Councilor Keating said, that, the contentious ballot fight is not something that folks is their first option. But I will say people really do believe that if we're going to have a permanent tax put on the voters or fee, they should have a say in that. And so if that's the direction council's going to go, then we do believe that the voters should have a say. So that's kind of where we're at. I do want to just like put into perspective, our general fund, our overall city budget's about $1.4 billion over the biennium. The general fund in that, for an annual is about $244 million. This is 11.5 million, so it's about 4.7%, I think, of a gap that we have. There's a lot of other communities who are also facing gaps. Portland right now has about a 9% and almost $100 million gap that they're planning to make reductions without actually getting a fee, at least at this point. So it's not easy, and we're not suggesting that it is, and we're not suggesting that the city hasn't already taken a lot of steps to try to bring their budget back into alignment. But we are suggesting that we might need to make some hard decisions about what we can and can't have as a community right now, right? And that doesn't mean it can't come back. We can't look at it down the road if we're in a different financial situation. So we're very open and willing to have those conversations with folks and appreciate the fact that this is a difficult conversation to have. So thanks.
Sounds about right to me. Well, I also want to just thank you for having me and for putting this event together. In another of my hats, I've been the co-chair of the Active Bethel Community Neighborhood Association since 2018, so I'm well aware of the work that goes into planning a general meeting. So thank you to the SHiNA board for that, and this is a lovely evening to be out here with you all. So I am the chair of the City of Eugene Budget Committee. It's my 4th year as chair, my 7th and final year as a citizen member of the committee. And so I'm going to just, I think, focus on speaking about the budget process a little more. With my budget chair hat on, I'm actually explicitly not allowed to speak to election items in any way that implies an opinion of mine. Pure factual information I can sort of get away with, but I'm gonna, as much as possible, try not to talk about the referendum and just focus on the budgeting side of things and elaborate some on the background Brittney shared of how we got here. So we are in the process, as Brittney did say, moving towards a priority-based budget, but historically and including our most recent budget that we passed 2 years ago, we do have a structure where each budget, each annual budget, and now each biennial budget starts with what did we do in the previous budget, recalculate what the cost of all of the services we provided there would be now if we move that forward, and update our revenue forecasts and see, do we have a surplus, a gap, and then it adjusts from there. The city manager is in charge of that process. After the city manager puts a budget together, that then comes to the budget committee for review. The budget committee is 8 citizen members and all 8 members of council. The 16 of us have a chance to review that budget, discuss it, make potential amendments and changes to it that we see fit. And then we send that amended budget forward to council, and they have another last pass over it and put it into effect. So with the change to biennial budgeting, that means we've done a total of 19 budgets in the last 20 years. And each time it comes through and we see, do we have that gap or do we have a deficit that we have to address with what's euphemistically called budget strategies, either cuts or new revenue. We've needed budget strategies in 16 of those 19 budgets. This is a ongoing, long-term, systematic, and presumably not changing structural problem that we have. It isn't from any one individual source. There are some years in there where the biggest driver of that need for budget strategies was the years that PERS costs skyrocketed. There have been other times. Most recently, this current gap is largely from the inflation that we all felt. But the cap on revenues that exists, because almost all of the revenue, especially for the general fund, comes through property taxes. And those were capped in the mid-90s on how fast they could grow, as well as some other behind-the-scenes pieces that Measures 5 and 50 do that really limit how much our property taxes can grow, and even as well how much we can benefit even from growth and bringing new property taxes onto the roll. So that restriction on our growth and the fact that expenses are subject to inflation in any number of ways. We have consistently, year after year after year, found ourselves with a gap. And when we were passing that biennial budget 2 years ago for the 23-25 fiscal year, that gap calculated out at that time as $8.3 million that we wrote into that budget as a plug of revenue to be determined. And then we directed the formation of a revenue committee to find a way to fill that plug, to determine what revenue to use for that gap. And we made that choice after considering what those cuts would look like and decided we didn't have $8.3 million in cuts that we were comfortable pursuing. So we chose to pass a budget with that plug in it instead and sent that out to the Revenue Advisory Committee, which looked at a huge list of different potential revenue sources. And that advisory committee came back to council with the proposal for the fire service fee I'm not going to talk about tonight. But that is how the background sort of what brought us to that point, why we asked for new revenue sources, and where that proposal came from. Skipping through the process with that which I shall not name to where we are today, we are looking at the beginning of the next budget cycle. We're on April 30th, going to have a budget committee meeting where the city manager will present the proposed budget for the upcoming biennium to us. And at this point, regardless of what decisions council makes, all of them will leave us with the current revenue that exists and nothing filling that TBD plug. So we will be presented on April 30th with a budget that has about $11.5 million of cuts in the general fund. And then we will have the pleasure through 3 more meetings on May 14th, 21st, and 28th as a committee of determining if the cuts in the city manager's proposed budget are the ones we want to move forward with, if we want to adjust or shift those, and deciding how to get to a balanced budget that's from that $11.5 million deficit that it's going to start at. So at this point, from a budget committee standpoint, where we are in May, there's not any other options of what that can look like. We will have to make those very hard choices of how to cut $11.5 million to get that budget down to balance with the revenue that is available at this time. And whatever we come up with at the end, whatever the city manager proposes, and then we end up with as we go through our process, we'll forward that on to city council, and city council will take their last pass at it, and then they'll have to pass that in June, and that budget will go into effect on July 1st. And then maybe something will change, maybe it won't, depending on what else happens and what other paths we take, and whether we find some new solution that hasn't been proposed yet, whether voters choose to vote in a certain way on something. All of those effects will potentially shift things after the fact, and if it goes that direction, supplemental budgets are available to make adjustments. But in terms of where we are right now, those cuts are going to happen in some way, shape, or form in May and June through the budgeting process, and we'll know very soon specifically what they are. Right now, we have the lists from that February work session the city manager put forward of pretty good idea of what the likely cuts are. We know a lot of things that have been named as potential cuts, and I have a sense of what I expect will be in the proposed budget, but we won't have to guess anymore by May. That proposed budget will be out and we'll be working on it. So we'll know exactly what the proposed cuts are by April 30th, and then what the true cuts are by the end of June. And then we'll move forward from there as a city. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Councilor Eliza Kashinsky.
Here we are. I think I am Eliza Kashinsky. I am the Ward 1 City Councilor. I'm not checking my messages. I just have notes on my phone. So I was sworn in as the Ward 1 City Councilor in January. And the very first meeting I went to was discussion of the fire fee. So everyone was like, you're being thrown into the deep end. I'm like, actually, no, that's okay. Because I've been on budget committee for 7 years and I was on the revenue committee that brought up the fire fee. One of the interesting things about being on budget committee and then revenue is that every single year, what budget committee primarily talks about is what are the cuts? What are the areas where we're gonna be cutting this year to fill that gap? And we debate like, are we gonna try and backfill this thing? Are we gonna try and backfill that thing? Where are we gonna make those trade-offs and where are we gonna make those cuts? And every single year that I was on budget committee, I said, can we please also talk about revenue? Can we also look at revenue and talk about revenue? And the first year I did that, one of the persons who was cycling off after having been on the committee was saying, hey, I've been asking that question for the past 6 years. And I know that I have colleagues on budget committee who are started asking that question as soon as they got on to it too. So it was very good to have this very specific subcommittee that looked at that revenue option, which is one of the ones that, well, every year we talked about cuts and we talked about expenses. Budget committee pretty much never talked about revenue and revenue options. They've done it, I think, 3 times in the past 15 years. Have they had those more focused conversations? So when we looked through all those options, we get what I call the big book of revenue. And it's a binder that's like about this thick and has all the details you could possibly think of about all the different revenue sources that you could really ever want to talk about. So it's like, hey, could we raise this money by charging a bicycle licensing fee? And the answer to that is no, because that brings in like $5 and you spend most of the money charging, like setting up that meeting. So going through all of that, the item that met most of the criteria, the best of all the criteria medium, just A, would bring in enough money to actually fund the gap. B, it could be implemented fast enough to actually fund the gap. And then some other kind of pieces in there of how that would fit was this fire service fee. And the question we get is, if this is a fire service fee, why are we talking about saving Green Hill, saving the library, right? So one of the things to understand is that the city's budget is not like having $50 in your pocket, right? It's like having a wallet that has $45 worth of gift cards and a $5 bill. And it's great for the things you have gift cards for, right? You can go pave some roads because we've got a bond for that. You can run the Holt Center because that's funded from ticket sales and from room tax, right? But then there are all those things that are left over that you don't have gift cards for. And you're trying to figure out how to divvy up that $5 to pay for all those things that you don't have that debit